Do you hate your business? Well, I found myself in a very similar situation. I'm going to tell you exactly what I did about it. Surprisingly, very, very common to hate the thing that you created. Elizabeth Gilbert, in her book Eat, Pray, Love, said, I looked around my life and I was here for every single step of building it. And then I looked around and I wondered why none of it resembled me. Now, I butchered that quote, but the vibe is still there. So, what happens when you realize that about your business? As soon as I identified that I hated my business, I was horrified, overwhelmed, and I felt like, oh my God, all these years that I've done and put into this are now obliterated. I need to start over and do something else. So I felt very defeated. But that was the wrong frame of putting on it. It can be fixed, and the business can serve you as opposed to you serving it. As soon as I realized that, I put on paper everything that was bothering me about my business. Now, yours might be that you're taking too much time to spend on it or that you don't have enough money from it. It could be a million different things, and everyone's reason is going to be different. So go ahead and write down your reasons why you don't like your business. Now, this is where it gets a little interesting because a lot of people would have just told you to do that. It's easy to write it down. Then what? Well, here's where it gets interesting. So now you need to do the second step, which is find your values. My values are going to be different than your values. And your values are going to be different than your wife's, your husband's, your kids, your mom's, the random person on the street, whomever it is. And because they're different, the things that bother you about your business are not going to bother them about your business, etc. So you need to put down on another column what your values are. For me personally, it's freedom, authenticity, and growth. And when I'm not exhibiting or I'm not spending ample time in any of those three things, I feel deflated. I feel like a grape that has been plucked from the vine and I'm sitting there dead and withering away and losing all my life force. And you might feel similarly. So write down your values. If you don't know what your values are, you can Google James Clear values. I believe there's probably 50 to 100 of them on that list. And then you just go through and you just feel in your body what resonates as you read each of those words. That's how I did it. I think I came up in circle about 6, and then I really went into the top 3. You want about 3 or 4 values. This is going to be incredibly surprising if you've done this or if you haven't done this before. Because what you're going to find is you're going to find that not only does this apply to business, but it applies to the rest of your life too. And there's probably a lot of things that you're doing or not doing that you could be doing that speak more to your values. Once again, for me, growth, authenticity, transformation. So then what do we do now that we have our values and we have what is contradictory to our values? Because the things you wrote down are probably going to be exactly contradictory to your values. Well, you reframe the process again. Now, this is easier said than done, and I go into other videos about this, but basically, you're going to sit there and reframe every single thing that is on the things you hate about your business list and try to reframe it and try to look at it in the sense of how can I make this something that either brings it closer to my values or aligns with my values or brings it into the value column. A good example just from my own personal experience. I was flipping houses. I have a house flipping business and I flipped over 120. When I discovered that I hated my business, I was in the middle of about 4 or 5 different projects. As soon as I realized how miserable this was making me, I felt like I had to get out of these projects as fast as possible. I couldn't spend one more day in there because it was just making me so miserable. However, reality is different than that. And these projects were going to need a couple more months before they were completed. So there was nothing I can do in terms of the reality. But there was something I could do in terms of the reframing. So then I thought, okay, growth is one of my values. How am I growing from this experience? What am I learning from this experience? How can I grow more as an entrepreneur in this experience? And that led me to a really interesting thought process. The thought process was, if me being here, in showing up to these projects every day, because that was the worst part about it, showing up every day, if me doing that takes me away from my joy, then I can get someone else to do that. And that's growth. If I learned that I can get myself out of that day-to-day operations task and put someone else into that task, then that is me growing as an entrepreneur. And that is a win, because that moves it from the dislike column to the value column. And that was really, really interesting to me. And then another one of my values is authenticity. I thought, how can I bring more authenticity into this situation that I'm dealing with right now? Well, instead of posting on social media my before and afters, where it looks so nice, I made all this money, I can start to post things that I'm actually feeling about the process. So I can make little short videos on Instagram or stories or whatever about how this process is actually currently making me miserable right now. But I know there's a light at the end of the tunnel. This is what we found today. This is how much money it costs. This is how much I'm annoyed by this cost, etc. So those kind of things were really, really important. And I would challenge you to do that too with your business and that situation that you're finding yourself in. Try to make it align more with your values. All right, so as soon as you have this and you write it all down and you start to realize where you can push some of these into the value column, then you have to execute. Now, execution is where a lot of people online leave it because it's logical. If you have something that's bothering you and then you map out a process to make it better, then you just execute. Most gurus online and most people online would say, okay, it's logical, so go ahead and do it. However, people don't operate logically, as you might have noticed. So it can make sense in your mind that this was the map, this was the plan that we just planned out. Now I have to go execute it. That shouldn't be a problem. But that is going to be a problem. There's going to be some friction around the execution side of it. So let me give you a little bonus tip about how I help with friction in execution. So there's something that I like to call expanders. Those are people that expand your concept of what is possible or what can be done. Now, I borrow a lot of my belief system based off of the To Be Magnetic podcast. It's a fantastic podcast, so you can check it out. But they talk about expanders a lot. So basically, if I'm going through life and I want $1 million, but my mom doesn't have $1 million, my dad doesn't have $1 million, and none of my friends have $1 million, it's going to be hard for me to subconsciously implant that belief that $1 million is possible. And so what do? Well, you go and find an expander. You go find something that you can look at, see, taste, touch, smell, feel that encompasses what you already have. Now, in my example, I used $1 million, which is a very tangible thing. But what you are going to find is the expanders are going to be representing intangibles. So if you are wanting $1 million, then what you're probably really wanting is wealth or freedom or something like that. So you want to tease that out. You want to tease what's really down below the surface and then go find an expander for that. So in our business metaphor, if we're mapping out what we need to do with our business and we're bringing the things that are terrible about our business into more alignment with our values, and now we have to go execute on it, we need to go find some expanders that have already executed on something that we're looking to execute it. So for example, just to use that example again, if I wanted more authenticity in my business, then I would make reels and content around how house flipping is not this glamorous HGTV life, that is actually fairly stressful, and no matter what happens, you're going to be spending way more money than you think you're going to, and it's going to take way more long. It's going to take a lot longer than you want to, blah, blah, blah. So if I want to start making content around that and be vulnerable and authentic, then I want to find someone who's an expander that makes vulnerable and authentic content as well. Do you see what I mean? That helps with the execution, because the execution is going to have a lot of friction around it. So you want to find someone that helps make it a little more frictionless. This channel is going to be dedicated to helping business people and entrepreneurs overcome their mental blocks. It is something I am so insanely passionate about. So if you want to work with me one-on-one, that's great. I have no one-on-one clients yet. This is my very first video. But if you want to jump on the newsletter, I'm going to start doing a newsletter about mindset, about entrepreneurs specifically, overcoming their blocks. So you can jump on the newsletter and get tips and tricks from me. You can watch the next video where I go more into the process. This is very, very important, so do not miss the next.